The world is nasty. More on that in a second. First, I want to show you some of the stuff I've been working on. I've been doing stuff on a computer. So all of this is basically photo scans from around my neighborhood. I think you've already seen a lot of this. I've just kind of been letting myself go a little bit nuts with it, and it's been really fun. Just kind of like exploring with the mood and stuff. I'm kind of just letting my interest dictate the way I'm working on stuff, and I have an idea for the scene that'll it's going to be based over a voiceover, and so it's supposed to be like a little bit kind of dreamlike, but these wakes were a little bit... Actually, let's talk about the wakes a little bit. Wakes are a long-term goal that I've had because they're so complicated. Like, sometimes I'm on a big ferry, and the wake stretches for like miles, and other times, you know, it's just a little thing... it's just leaving a little wake, but they all follow, well, they follow different sorts of rules. Like there's the turbulence involved of the water crashing in on itself and the propeller churning everything up, and that's crazy. But there's also like just a linear disturbance moving through water generates a predictable pattern. Like the lower wavelengths move faster and the smaller wavelengths move a little bit slower, and those work together to form a very predictable, actually I think static wake pattern, and I've been trying to figure out how to get a texture for that. I was Googling it, I couldn't find anything particularly high res enough, so I actually made one in dynamic paint, and it actually looks like the reference I was going for, which is cool. And so I exported that as a height map and parented those disturbances to empties, and so it plays nice with the rest of the plane of water. And so I might make a video about this later. I still want to figure out a few more things about it. It's you know, maybe 30% of the way there for what I'd want, but still kind of exciting because I've been working on that for a while. But I was working on this shot right here, and I like it. There's also Nathan helped me a lot with this. He made a system. I made the bike models, but he rigged them up, and he made actually a really cool system where you can create the path, and then he made a script that you can use to just stick it right onto the ground here, and I used some wiggle bones on their hips to kind of like add some secondary motion too, which works pretty good. But I realized that what I was going for here is actually a real location. I was visiting my friend T. Christie, the same guy who made the Huberfish font back in 2014 when he lived in LA, and he and his friend Paul took me out to this place called the Salton Sea, which, given that it's a day trip away from LA, you've probably seen documented before because people who live in LA tend to be very good at documenting things, but it's kind of weird to be working on a digital environment and then realize that you're actually trying to channel a real place, which also, if you lived near there, you wouldn't be having to recreate digitally. But yeah, it was, look at this, everything was just encrusted, and so you have all of these different pieces, but they're all unified by just like the absurd salinity of this sea, of this lake, whatever. Basically, all of this runoff came in there, but nothing runs out, and so the filth is just accumulated, and like the minerals have accumulated for decades. It was kind of an accidentally made body of water, I think. See, this is what I wanted to do. Everything is dead. It is not a good place. It's a place that feels like decay and kind of the end of the world. Look at this though. Like, this is, it just goes all the way, and there's this tiny little stretch of something there at the horizon, but other than that, there's no distinction between the land and the sky, and I think that's so cool. And just like, there's no real separation between objects. And look at this, there were old resort towns and stuff that were built along the sea before it got too nasty, but that made me want to try some new things. And so let's get, oh, look at that. Oh, that's so gross. This is so good. Let's get into it. So I've already talked a bit about this before. Like right here I have this dust node slipped in right at the end, and what that does is it actually puts dust onto the upwards facing orientation of any material it's applied to. So if we have like this this material here, and I add the dust group, suddenly he will have dust on top of his head also, although he's not very high res, so it may not work very well, but you can kind of see what it's doing there. But see, like right here, I scanned a bunch of Caitlin's bones from her collection, and each one had a different level of brightness or dirt on it, and they didn't totally gel together all that well, and so at the end of every different material, I stuck this same shared dirty bones scenario node, and if you go in here and I turn it on, you can see that now all of the bones feel more uniform. at the loss of, you can see a lot of their original texture and all of that. That's kind of the trade-off. But you can use this to do a lot of different things. Like you can add algae across a lot of different stuff. You could add dirt across a lot of different things. Water dripping down, every surface. If you wanted to make every object in the scene suddenly have water dripping down it or whatever, that would be hard to add to every material. You can add a node, and then you can get to tweak things globally as well. And so this is a nice way. Basically what it's doing is it's mixing everything with this one diffuse shader here, and then it's also mixing in on the top faces this kind of like sandy look, as if sand and dust has accumulated on the horizontal surfaces. So I went for a walk today just kind of thinking about these types of procedural gunk, and look at this one. This is like, it's some lichen and some bird poop and some moss and some barnacles and some grass and some rust, all in one picture. It's everywhere. Or walking along the water, barnacles like to grow in a very specific band of submerged under the ocean, at high tide, and in the air at low tide, I think. But to apply those barnacles to the right place on every material can be kind of tricky. However, this is something I put together last night, and you can see it just matches wherever this empty is at. It's using the location of the empty. And so I thought, and it's being applied to all these different materials here, and they just can kind of, whatever you do, it'll just play nice with whatever the empty is telling it. So I thought maybe today we would try to make some barnacles. Actually, let me show you. I brought my barnacle setup into this scene, and just like with the bone dust, I stuck it at the end of every material shader here, which didn't take very long because a lot of this is just instancing. But now if I move this empty around, I can pick the level of barnacles that I want. And actually, originally I had it so it was only at one bandwidth, but I decided to go full Salton Sea and cover the whole seabed with it too, just to kind of give it that white feeling. And I re-rendered it last night, and honestly, it doesn't really feel all that different. It's because I kind of chickened out and I actually didn't go full barnacle. You can see I made the lowest level of the gradient kind of like this gray, so it wasn't full barnacle. I should have gone full barnacle. But technically, I was very pleased with how it turned out, because especially when you're working with photo scans and assets from a lot of different sources, any process that lets you kind of help stick them all, make them feel really cohesive can be really handy. Okay, and I know I'm kind of overly harping on this, but it's for me, it's been the holy grail for so long, because I always have a scene like this where you have the wall and you have the ground, and they both have all these textures on them, but the seams and the joins between them, everything still reads as separate objects, and so much there's just like dirt and life and algae and everything that fills in the cracks and kind of just makes everything connected, which is really hard to do in a computer. But last night I made this shot, and I'm still working on some tutorials. I do want to do some tutorials for how to do water. I'm still kind of learning a little bit, but yeah, like look at the base here. You can see the silt that's all just gone down into the ground. It's all just controlled by this one shader over the top of everything that I just get to place wherever I want. Like here it is down below, and I'm like, let's make the bottom feel as if it just has some accumulated debris. So I guess I'm just a little inordinately excited about techniques like this. So let's start with the biggest issue. If we go to texture, let's just add a Musgrave, height right into the color so we can easily see it. Okay, so let's say this is our dust or mold or whatever we want on top of our material. If we duplicate this and scale it up, you can see the mold scales up with the object, which you would expect there to be the same mold density across every object. And that's because it's referencing the object's coordinates for its location, which means we don't want it looking at the object's coordinates, we want it looking at something else. So let's create an empty, shift A, empty sphere, or it can literally be anything, but an empty, is nice for this. And I have Node Wrangler turned on, so I can just hit Control T to get these nodes right here. And instead of the generated coordinates based off of the object, I'm going to say, hey, use some object coordinates. And it goes, which object? So we get to pick, I'm actually going to use we could just pick empty from here, but you could also grab the eyedropper and just go to empty. And now, it'll be uniform because it's not looking at the object's coordinates, it's looking at the empty's coordinates. And look at that. Now we can move all of its parent to that. And honestly, that's the crux of the entire thing right there. So, barnacles. We have here, your classic beach setup, sand with all of the colored beach cubes. You can see each one has its own material and all of that. So let's make a barnacle setup on the sand here that we can then easily apply to all the other cubes. So this is the original material. I'm going to separate here. Here's the material output, what actually gets applied to the surface. I'm going to separate this, and whatever we do in between here, we're going to turn into a group that we can easily slap onto the other guys. So first we've got the sand, but I also want to add a diffuse shader, and that's going to be our barnacles eventually. Let's mix them together with the mix shader here. Poof. And you can see right now we're just toggling between the two. But what is going to tell it what's going to be barnacle and what's going to be the original sand? Well, if you look at barnacles, they're really creepy, nasty little volcanic-looking suction cup mouths that grow everywhere and they try to stab your toes. And that kind of reminds me of the Voronoi texture. So, texture, Voronoi here. And you can see if I plug distance straight into the factor, it's already going to be doing something. Here, I'll turn up the scale, and you can see it kind of looks like dots, which is creepy. Here, let's invert it like that, and yeah, that's vernacular. And I actually want to use this Voronoi texture for 3 things. And so here, let's kind of set this up a little bit. The mix will go right here at the end. This will be the diffuse shader, which will be our barnacles. Here's the original, and I'm going to set up 3 color ramps. All of them using the same Voronoi data. The first one is going to be controlling the height of the barnacles. It's going to be controlling the bump map. The second one's going to be controlling the color. And the third one is actually going to be controlling the mix between the barnacle shader and the color shader. So we just have to kind of dial those in. To get that, that volcanic feeling, I'm actually going to make it so that the center of each dot isn't the highest point, but outside of it a little bit is. And here, I'm just going to add one more point here. Drag it there and darken it somewhat, and you can see now that the center is a little bit darker. And if we turn that into a height map by plugging into the normal of the diffuse here, obviously anything that goes into a normal has to run through a normal map or a bump map first to work. So bump map into the height, and we should see a little volcano situation. Yeah, that's feeling pretty good. Alright, the second one is going to be the color. I'm going to plug that into the diffuse here. And right now it's just doing a typical kind of height map, like the base of the barnacle is dark and the center is pure white. Let's actually make the center kind of like a weird dark beige. I'm going to make the very rim, if I line this up with the highest point on the bump map, I can make the rim of it the lightest bit, and then it'll kind of just go down into a slightly darker, yeah, color like this. Maybe I'll even make this just slightly darker. Cool. Alright, and the third one here is going to be controlling the mix between our original shader and our barnacle shader. So I'm going to plug this in right here to the mix factor. And you can see I can dial in how visible everything is. I'm just going to kind of clump it together like that, and there, that looks very much like a barnacle situation. One thing you're probably noticing is they look squished right here, and that's because we haven't yet set up the thing we've already talked about, which is the reference coordinates. So I'm going to create an empty sphere right here. Here, let's stick it there. And going back to the Voronoi texture, because I've got Node Wrangler on, I can just hit Control T and get my mapping nodes. Do what we already did, plug in the object here, and we say, hey, use the empty, or you can use the little eyedropper and just select it. You can see it's already here, but it's very, very tiny, which actually looks more like barnacles. But here, let's turn the scale down just a little bit here. Cool. That's feeling pretty good. But we only want the barnacles to be growing at a certain elevation, all across everything. And so I'm gonna say the barnacle generation is feeling pretty good right now. But this bit that controls where there are barnacles and where there aren't, I want to add something else to that to combine it so it's only growing at that one elevation, I guess. And to do that, I'm gonna create a gradient texture. And if I control click on this, I'll get a preview node that shows, look at that, it's just going from 0 on one side to 1 on the other side. But if I bring down these same mapping nodes here, the one using the empty coordinates, plug those in, suddenly it's using the coordinates of our empty. Of course, it's going right now, the gradient's going vertically, and we want it to go horizontally, so I'm just going to rotate that 90 degrees right there. And now it's lined up with the sphere. One thing you'll notice is that if I move this over so it intersects, it's pure black midway through the sphere, and I think it's basically pure white at the top of the sphere. And that's because the object's actually going from 1 to -1 at the base, and we can either deal with that, or we can... or we have all of these mapping nodes here. Here I can change like the scale of everything, the fall off, so it's even larger than the empty, and I can offset it like this. Woo! And so maybe we'll just do that. It doesn't really matter right now. And with that in mind, this isn't good, but it is kind of fun conceptually. As the water goes in and out, you can see it leaves kind of that path of wet sand that's drying behind it, which you sometimes see at the beach. And it's just based off of this right here, where I have the water level copying the location of this first empty, and this second empty is what powers the location of the gradient, blending these two textures together. That's all it is, and because it's behind on the wheel, it's always just lagging, you know, behind the ground. However, I do want to tweak the way the gradient texture is mapped onto the thing. Right now, it's basically going from 1 to 0 here, but if I add in a color ramp, so here's 0, here's 1. I'm gonna move the white to the center and put black on the other side as well. So now we just have a white band going through in here. I might actually reset some of these scales a little bit. Cool, so now I have this texture and I have the barnacle texture here. If we put a mix RGB node in here, put these together and set it to multiply, you can see it's kind of doing it. We turn the factor all the way up, and now we just have our tiny little cross section of barnacles. Here, let's maybe make it a little bit more narrow. I like that. Which works really good, except you can see it's maybe a little bit too straight. And so one thing you can do, again, if you can offset the coordinates like this, wouldn't it be cool if we could just stick some noise in there and just offset them randomly? Well, that is actually exactly what we can do. Here, I think we'd use most any of these noises. I'm going to use Musgrave just because I like it. Plug it into the height. At some point we should play around with some of the other stuff you can do by putting noise into, by offsetting location mapping, because you can get some really weird effects, especially if you do it into like an image texture. But let's see. Let's try to dial this in a little bit. I don't know. Turn down the dimension? That does nothing. I guess just turning up the detail. Ooh, no, turning up the detail and turning down the dimension gives us kind of a cool look here and here. Maybe we'll make it narrow. Yeah, okay. So we've been doing all of this, but secretly this is still plugged into the mix shader here. So if I click on this to get rid of that viewer node, we've got some barnacles kind of doing a thing. You can see right now they kind of fade in and out, so I might actually make this gradient not so gradated by putting a bright white on either side. And you can see now the cutoff's a little bit sharper here. If we wanted, we can always go in and change the amount of detail and dial all of that in. But I think I like this pretty good. Okay, so here's again our original shader still down here. This is our whole barnacle setup. I'm gonna select all of it and hit Control G, and now we're inside the group. I can tab in and out of that group if it's selected. I love being able to do this. Right now it's just labeled node group, but we can open the node properties and label it barnacle scenario. Cool. And now that we have that, let's click on this cube, and if we hit Shift A, group barnacle scenario, we can just stick it there, and look, now it has barnacles too. In fact, what I'm going to do is Control C, copy that, and just paste that into all these other objects here. Right there before. Right, it's going quick right now. If you have really complicated shaders, it can take a while to recompile, but it'll still work. But now look at this. We can control where the barnacles are. We can control the scale of the barnacles and the noise and all of that. And at any point we can still go in. I guess this kind of looks a little bit like bird poop right now. But at any point we can still go in and make global changes that will affect everything. And this is one of the most useful things to me, is being able to make big global changes without having to open up every single object and do all of that. Actually, here, let me append in this piece I scanned down at the beach, and let me kind of line this up here, and I'll just give it the barnacles as well, so we can see how it looks on a real life thing. And it's kind of subtle. Here, I might grab the empty here, and yeah, we can move it around. We can change go back into the barnacle settings. I want to make it a little bit taller. Yeah, there we go. Now it's a thicker band. But it's already such a nice way to blend all of these different things together. You can see, especially if you had different scans or we gave this any sort of texture that wasn't just, you know, a yellow cube, it would do quite a bit. And now I'm torn if I want to keep going on this and being like, look, now let's do rain, now let's do mud, now let's do moss in the corners. I guess that is one thing to talk about. There's different ways of deciding where this texture is applied. Actually, I just set this up. Use the wireframe node to mix between transparent and emission, so you get this kind of like, you know, effect. And instead of toggling over to a barnacle shader, it's going to this wireframe shader wherever this empty is at, which could be a cool, I don't know, scanning thing. But okay, let's say we have this red shader and this, you know, white shader going through the mix. It decides, you know, bump, 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 bump. But whatever we plug into this is going to decide what's red and what's white. And yeah, it is fun to plug different, this kind of back to basics, but different random textures into that. See what happens. Yeah, that's cool. And that's because if we Control-Shift-Click on this to get the mapping node, you can see it's just putting these values. You know, the white is like 1, black is 0, and it's plugging that into this. Very, very straightforward. If we have a normal map here, and we use a separate X, Y, Z, so we can get each different axis on its own, and we Control-Shift-Click on this, you can see we get front, back, left, right, top, bottom. And if we plug this into the mix factor right here, we get red on the bottom and white on the top, which could be, you could use for snow or dust or anything that just accumulates or whatever. What else do we got? I've never done this, and I don't know if it'll even work in Eevee, but there is an ambient occlusion node. Here, let's plug this into the mix factor. It's trying to compile the shader. It looks like it doesn't work, but my guess is if we jump over into cycles. The downside about it is it takes a long time to build, which is why I don't ever actually use the ambient occlusion node, because I don't like waiting for this loading render kernels process. Okay, so that's been like a couple minutes or something. In theory, it would use the ambient occlusion, so it would get you all the cracks, which means if you use that and maybe mix that with like a noise texture, you could automatically have moss growing in every like crack of whatever material you wanted, which would be great for like those intersections between the wall and the ground. So that would have been really cool if that worked, and so I'm bummed it's taking forever to load the kernel. But yeah, a lot of times mixing these techniques together so that you have something like bird poop that only lands on horizontal surfaces, but maybe only above a certain threshold, like on rooftops or something, because you combine it with the location placement with the empty or whatever. That could be really handy. But you know what? I think this video went pretty well, and so I think I'm just gonna wrap it up here. I will talk to you soon. I've got some videos I'm very excited to make about water and all of that once I feel like I have my head wrapped around it a little bit better. But hope you're all doing well. Talk to you soon.